Hi there, I welcome you to my video about probability concepts. This is Senior Hannington, your accounting tutor. Now, in today's video, we talk about the probability concepts, but basically I'll look at the key term, which is probability. Then I'll also talk about the different categories of probabilities. Now, when we talk about probabilities, we are referring to that numerical value that measures the likelihood that an event occurs. Remember, a probability assumes a value between 0 and 1, where a value 0 indicates an impossible event and a value 1 indicates a definite event. Now, probabilities are categorized into three classes. We have what we call subjective probabilities. We have what we call classical probabilities, as well as empirical probabilities. We normally use the term probabilities when it comes to experiments. An experiment in statistics is a process that leads to one of the several possible outcomes. Probabilities, of course, as I've told you, they can be classed as subjective probabilities, empirical probabilities, as well as classical probabilities. We need to know what these categories are. Now, when we talk about a subjective probability, here we are calculating probabilities by drawing on personal and subjective judgment. So here we refer to personal assessment without referring to data. Of course, subjective probabilities differ from person to person and may contain a high degree of personal bias. The other category is the empirical probabilities. Now, empirical probabilities, these are calculated as a relative frequency of occurrence. So we refer to the data based on observed outcomes of an experiment to come up with such probabilities. So empirical probabilities, these are observed relative frequencies with which an event occurs. Of course, the experiments must be repeated large number of times for the empirical probabilities to be accurate. The other category is the classical probability. The classical probability is based on logical analysis rather than observation or personal judgment. When it comes to classical probabilities, they can be used in games of chances. The assumption in here is that the outcomes of the experiment are equally likely. I have a review question here, which I can use to see if we can label the probability as empirical, classical, or subjective. Jane Peterson has taken Amtrak to travel from New York to Washington, D.C. on 6 occasions, of which 3 times the train was late. Therefore, Jane tells her friends that the probability that this train will arrive on time is 0.50. Would you label this probability as empirical or classical? Why would this probability not be accurate? Now, I've told you that an empirical probability, this is a probability that is calculated as a relative frequency of the occurrence. So here, we look at the observed relative frequency with which an event occurs. Of course, in this case, we see that the train, out of the 6 occasions, the train was late 3 times. So we are looking at the observed outcomes of the train being late. We see that the train has been late on 3 times, but out of the 6 occasions. So here we are referencing to data based on observed outcomes. So I would label this probability as an empirical probability, not a classical probability. Why would this probability not be accurate? As I told you before, that for empirical probabilities to be accurate, the experiments must be repeated large number of times for such probabilities to be accurate. Here we are looking at 3 times out of the 6 occasions when the train was late. So this probability is not accurate because it is based on a small sample, just 3 out of the 6 occasions. This is my answer, as you can see it on the screen, that this is an empirical probability since it is based on observed outcomes of an experiment. However, this probability is unlikely to be accurate because it is calculated from a small sample of 6. So it's not an accurate one. Now, one thing which we need to know is that when it comes to empirical probabilities and classical probabilities, these generally do not vary from person to person. So they are grouped as objective probabilities, meaning that these two categories of probabilities, we can group them as objective probabilities. In summary, we have 2 categories of probabilities. We have what we call subjective probabilities and objective probabilities. Under objective probabilities, that's where we have classical probabilities and empirical probabilities. So in this video, I've talked about what probabilities are and how we categorize probabilities. This is Senior Huntington, your accounting tutor. We are here to help you. So you submit your questions or concerns in the comments and you'll get the responses as soon as possible. Share this channel to your other friends such that they can also benefit. Thank you for watching.